going to be talking about a typical conversation starter. We're going to be talking about the question, what's keeping you busy these days? And this question is really useful when you're interacting with an acquaintance, someone you don't know so well, or you're interacting with maybe a coworker or a colleague in the office. You're kind of running into them in the hallway or in the break room, or you're having some time between meetings, maybe just procrastinating by having some coffee near the coffee machine or the water cooler. So this is a question that you're going to ask somebody because it's going to help them give you it's going to help them give you the information they want to share. Instead of you trying to force somebody into a conversation, the question, what's keeping you busy these days, is really going to help you be able to kind of engage the other person in a conversation. So basically this question, what's keeping you busy these days, is a question that you can use in order to keep the conversation open. This is a very perfect example of what we call an open question. An open question is a question where you're not leading the person in any particular direction. You're giving them all the power. And in the previous episodes of Conversations with Kim, I've talked a lot about how you want to make sure you let the other person decide how much information they want to share. And that can help you judge whether or not the person's going to engage in conversation with you. It also is kind of a polite thing to do because you're basically handing them the control of the conversation, at least at the beginning, and then you can start steering the conversation to other topics. So I would love for you to think about, as we go through this explanation, have you heard this question before? What's keeping you busy these days? Have you had questions about it? Do you know how to answer this question? Would you like to answer this question a little more strongly? And also towards the end of the lesson, we're going to talk about how you can convert this question into something that is a little more interesting than just saying what's keeping you busy these days, because maybe you don't like the word busy. So we'll talk about some alternatives to this question. So, like I said, today we're talking about what's keeping you busy these days. And this is really good for an acquaintance or a friend, somebody you haven't seen in a while. So if you're going to say this with an acquaintance or friend, you're going to ask this question if it's been a few weeks or months since you saw them, because you really don't have an idea of what's going on in their lives. If you know what's going on in their life, then you want to make sure that you ask a question that's a little more specific. Maybe check in about their family or their new job. But if you haven't seen the person in a while, what's keeping you busy these days is a great invitation for them to start sharing. It enables them to give you the most important details that they want to share with you. Or maybe they don't want to talk about their job. Maybe they just got fired or laid off. So maybe by saying what's keeping you busy these days, they can focus on something else. This can be used with a coworker, because the coworker might have a project that they're focused on, and maybe you can help them with it. So by offering this kind of open question, what's keeping you busy these days, you're going to invite the other person to give you a strong response, and then you'll be able to evolve the conversation from there. Remember, all of these open conversation questions are invitations to get started. As the conversation evolves, you can ask more specific questions and really help the people understand what it is that you want to talk about in the conversation. So this is a really great question. And as you can probably notice from some of the earlier questions we've talked about in the first few episodes of Conversations with Kim, we're really focusing on open questions, but we're talking about strong responses. So we're going to talk about your responses too in this live lesson. Like I said, so let's talk a little bit about answers. Your answer to this type of question, what's keeping you busy these days, is going to guide the conversation. No pressure, right? It's a little pressure. But I want you to think about, as we start formulating strong responses and talking more about this question, what's the goal of what you're sharing with the other person? Because if you're saying, the reason this question is so important is I once had a client say, my coworker keeps asking me what's keeping me busy, what's new with me, and honestly, I'm busy with my child, and I really don't have a great response for this question. So you don't have to answer literally. Like, I have a 2-year-old and he's not sleeping, and so I'm staying up all night and I'm so exhausted and I hate my life. Like, that's a literal answer. You're telling the absolute 100% truth. But maybe it's not okay to say that in the workplace, or maybe you don't want to tell an acquaintance, oh my gosh, life is terrible right now, right? So you don't have to answer completely 100% the absolute first answer that comes to your mind. Like all of the questions we're talking about, I want you to think about your goal. What is your goal when you are answering this question? What's your goal for what you want to share with the other person? That's going to guide your answer. That's going to help you come up with a stronger answer that's going to start the conversation going. And like some of you were asking in the chat a little bit earlier, when you want to sound more fluent, there's two aspects of fluency. There's the fluency of being able to speak without thinking in your native language, but there's also the sounding fluent, the sounding natural, which is enabling the conversation to flow. And I encourage you to focus on sounding fluent rather than really trying to trick your brain into thinking only in English. If you don't have a lot of opportunities to speak English, that will come with time. You want to make sure when you do have the opportunity to speak, you're really allowing the conversation to flow. That will help you sound fluent. So what you want to do is give a strong answer to these type of questions that will keep the conversation going. And as you continue into the conversation, that's going to help you with the other aspect of fluency because you're going to be able to start thinking in English. I hope that helps you. Let me know in the chat if that's a helpful thought to keep in mind as you go through these questions, especially with this particular series. So yeah, if you're in the office and somebody says, what's keeping you busy these days? You don't want to respond, well, I'm working on this stupid report for my boss that I think is a big waste of my time, because that's not a positive answer. And especially in American culture, we tend to focus on the more positive things, even if we do feel negative, but people want to hear the positive things. So you can say, I'm really excited about a new client, instead of saying, I'm doing this stupid report for my boss. Tell me if that makes sense to you guys. So as you think about your response, you want to think of the question as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to connect in conversation with the other person. So what kind of response can you guys give me now, or in the comments afterwards if you're watching the replay? What kind of response can you give me now that's going to enable you to continue the conversation with me once I start looking at your responses? What kind of information can you give me about what's keeping you busy these days that's going to keep the conversation going? So let's say, because I'm your teacher and you're my student, if you're telling me about your English experience, if you just say something simple like, I'm practicing English a lot. Well, what specifically? Give me more details so that I can ask you more questions, and then I can ask, well, what else are you doing? And we can evolve the conversation from there. If you're doing something for work that's really important to you and exciting, share it, but leave the conversation open. Enable the other person to ask more questions. I notice a lot in these live chats that people often respond with the exact precise answer, and there's no room for asking more questions. The conversation kind of ends. So leave the conversation open, and you'll see as I answer your questions in the live chat that we're going to be able to keep the conversation going. This is something you can practice, whether it's on chat, by interacting in a live lesson, or this is something you can do when you're speaking English. Remember, you still want fluency through your fingertips, through typing, just as much as you want fluency through speaking. So this is why this is equally as helpful for you. By commenting, participating in the live chat, it's really going to help you be able to answer this question. So like I keep mentioning, when you answer a question like, what's keeping you busy these days, you want to think about how you can keep the conversation moving forward with your response. Give the other person space to ask questions. Give the other person an opportunity to share their own experiences. This is what marks a good conversationalist, someone who is good at conversations in English. You don't have to be completely fluent to be able to do this. You have to be engaged in the conversation, interested in learning about another person. So you guys tell me if this is helping you. Those of you arriving a little bit later, I want you to think about how can you respond to what's keeping you busy these days and give just enough information that the other person can ask you more questions. Remember my video a few months ago is the secret to being a great conversationalist is asking better questions. So the person, if you're talking in a conversation and you leave the question open. So you give the person an open question, like what's keeping you busy these days? That person chooses to respond, and then you can ask more questions. If you're answering the question, what's keeping you busy these days? The other person has a chance to respond. and ask you more questions. And that's going to make them feel like they're participating in the conversation and they're having a great conversation with you. Let's keep going talking about this question, and then I'll look back at your responses. So when you answer this question, what's keeping you busy these days, you want to make sure you leave a little information, enough information that the other person can ask more questions. We talked about in the earlier ones, what do you do? Tell me about yourself. And where are you from, that you might want to give a more complete answer in order to help the other person know more about you. But this question, what's keeping you busy these days, is something that you're probably going to have with somebody that you know, but you might be asking a similar question in small talk, but after talking to the person for like 10 or 20 or 30 minutes, like more in depth in the conversation, someone might ask this. Now, I want you to understand that this question, what's keeping you busy these days, is designed to get you talking about what you're passionate about. That's why I said you don't always want to answer the literal answer, the precise answer, the exact answer that's the truth. You want to give some information about what you're interested in talking about, because the reality is that sometimes we have chores. You know, if you're a stay-at-home mom and you're taking care of your kids, maybe all you're doing is cleaning up after your kids all day, right? Maybe you work in an office. When I used to work in the law firm, most of my day was doing paperwork at the computer. So if I just answer my question with, I'm writing a lot of reports to send to the government, it's kind of boring, right? You don't want to have a conversation with me. And I have to admit, when I was 22 and answering that question, I probably told the truth. I didn't learn the secrets of conversation I'm trying to share with you guys. Now that I'm older, I would probably say, wow, I just started doing a lot of embroidery. I've talked a lot about my embroidery. Unfortunately, nothing's near here. So I've started creating embroidery art, and I really am enjoying that. Or for example, I'm creating this online teaching business, and I really love teaching live lessons on YouTube already. Wow, how many followers do you have on YouTube? What do you do? How do you teach live? How do you design this? It's giving the person more information. But if I say, oh, I'm filling out a lot of reports, or I'm doing homework, but you're not sharing. Trang had the great answer that she shared more details. She's studying for the entrance exam. We're going to keep the conversation going. She's going to tell me what she's interested in studying, what most motivates her, what kind of school she wants to go to. So think about how you can give enough information to keep the conversation flowing, not just stop it by being kind of boring. So you have to think about your goal when responding. So the other thing is that when you respond to this question, what's keeping you busy these days, you want to think about the other person. Can you invite the other person into the conversation? Can you kind of invite them either by giving a response that they may relate to? If they're your friend or your acquaintance or your coworker, they know you, they relate to you, so they're probably going to be able to share similar experiences. So if you're in the break room at work and you say, what's keeping you busy these days? And they say, wow, I'm working on this new client, but I'm interested in knowing how the marketing department might be able to help me with this. You're inviting the other person, imagine they're in the marketing department, into the conversation. So you're going to be able to keep going with the conversation. Or if somebody asks you what's keeping you busy these days and you don't have a good answer, maybe it's just you've been watching a lot of movies on Netflix or something like that. In that case, you can say, what about you? What's keeping you busy? And turn the question around. This is a great question. I should probably make a video just on this question, but so common in conversations. We just ask, what about you? How about you? And we turn the question to the other person. If you just kind of end and you don't say, what about you? It can be less conversational. It doesn't mean it's bad, but by saying, what about you? You're showing the other person you care about them. Your goal is to not just share everything about yourself. But now I want to talk about some better questions or more involved questions or even just more inspiring questions to what's keeping you busy these days. Like I said earlier in this lesson, Americans like to talk about how busy they are. We actually call it the busy trap because people are like, oh, what have you been up to? Oh, I'm so busy. I personally don't like when people say that. So busy can have that kind of negative connotation, that negative feeling. So instead of saying what's keeping you busy these days, you can say something a little more inspiring. For example, what's inspiring you these days? Instead of what's keeping you busy, what's inspiring you these days? Or what's keeping you inspired these days? What's motivating you these days? And you notice I'm using the present continuous because we're talking about these days. It's something happening right now. You want a current answer, an answer that the person can respond about their lives right now, not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago, not 10 years in the future, right now. What's keeping you motivated these days? What's inspiring you these days? What's motivating you these days? So as you hear these questions, I'd love for you to tell me what's inspiring you these days? What's motivating you these days? Another example, what's keeping your attention these days? Where are you focusing your attention these days, right now? What are you curious about right now? What's piquing your curiosity right now? What's making you interested in the world? Now, let's talk about why these versions of the questions are a little bit better. Or these versions of that question, what's keeping you busy these days, are a little bit better. Like I said, when someone says what's keeping you busy these days, they're interested maybe in your work or your family or your school. They might be interested, but they also might be interested in what you personally find most important. So often in all cultures, including the United States, we focus on this external stuff, what you do for work, school, family, but you have other passions and other interests. I know many of you are here watching this English video and you're feeling passionate about learning English, maybe for fun, maybe for work. It doesn't matter. But if you're passionate about learning English, you can talk about that. Some of you did already. If you're passionate about music, you want to share some information about that. What's inspiring you? Maybe you read this really great article that inspired you. Maybe you watched or listened to a podcast or watched a video on YouTube about somebody's life story and it inspired you. This is going to spark a more interesting conversation with the other person. So this kind of answers Trang's question, how can I keep the conversation going? Ask a better question. Ask something that's more specific. What's inspiring you? What's motivating you? If the person's negative, they may have a negative answer. But if the person is feeling inspired, you're going to have a much better conversation because they'll share, I'm so inspired by these stories of these people who started a nonprofit in Haiti, right? Or I'm so inspired by this story of, I watched a bunch of interviews recently about people who are famous on YouTube, who started YouTube channels when they were like 13. That's kind of cool. Like, how can you be so motivated when you're so young? I barely wanted to start mine a year ago, right? So you can kind of I'm inspired by people who have created their own businesses, and you can have a conversation about entrepreneurship. I'm inspired by people who have worked really hard to become talented musicians. Whatever it is, it's your life. It could be something, what's inspiring you. Maybe you're a painter, you're a writer, you're a singer, you're a musician, you play the flute, you play the saxophone, you play the trumpet, you play the guitar, you play the piano. What is keeping you motivated? You're an artist. Share a little bit about you. The more you can reveal about yourself in this conversation, the more that you're going to be able to have a better conversation. This is the secret that a lot of native speakers don't even understand that they need to learn. The more you can get motivated to share, the more you're going to have a good conversation. That's going to make you sound fluent. So, like I said, this question, what's keeping you busy these days, is asking, what are you passionate about? What's inspiring you? But it has the added benefit, this particular question these days, what's inspiring you these days? It's right now. It's the present. It's what's interesting or challenging or intriguing right now. And the focus on the present means that it could be a different conversation today than it was 3 years ago or 60 days ago when you last saw the person, because you might be inspired by different things at different times of your life. And it can also help you share about things that are happening right now. Maybe there's a new movie, a new TV show, a new book that you read. And so sometimes when we talk about current events, the conversation is a lot more interesting. So that's basically my lecture on talking about better questions and better answers to these questions. So now my challenge is for you. What's your answer? What's keeping you busy these days? What's inspiring you these days? What's motivating you these days? What are you curious about these days? What's keeping your attention these days? Tell me something a little more inspiring. Tell me something that's inspiring for you. It doesn't have to inspire me. Your job is not to make me feel like, oh, wow, this conversation was the best ever, but it's to give something that you really do care about to the other person so they can keep the conversation going with you. So, I think that's pretty much it. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, I have a free guide to making more interesting small talk, and it's basically the most typical topics that people are likely to talk about when making small talk. I've also just released a mini course on making small talk in English. And so if you're interested in that, you can check that out on my website, englishwithkim.com, and you can click courses and programs and you can find out more about that course. But my goal is really to help you ask better questions, really feel more confident in these situations, especially with native speakers, and keeping the conversation going. Like I said earlier, fluency includes being able to think in English or think in your target language and not be translating. But fluency also includes being capable and being productive in conversations. So these type of videos are really geared to help you be able to keep the conversation flowing. For me, that's really key, because even if you don't ask the question perfectly, if your meaning is clear, then you're able to open the conversation and keep it going. And that's really what I think your goal is when you want fluency, is you want to be able to participate confidently in conversations. So you guys let me know if that resonates with you. If you're watching the replay, make sure you comment below and tell me what's motivating you these days, what's inspiring you, what's keeping you busy these days. Think of something you want to say after this video, you can go ahead and leave a comment. I hope you found this helpful. Please let me know. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and be sure to share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want email reminders, the link will be below so you can sign up for email reminders. It's also a good idea to join my email community. You can join by signing up for the reminders, or get my free email course at soundmorenatural.com, or the free ebook or the free e-guide to making better small talk. This will enable you to get my insights that I share only through email. And there's going to be a couple of cool things coming up that the people on my email community will get information first. So be sure to sign up if you're not already. If you have any questions you want me to answer regarding conversation questions, be sure to submit them to the englishwithkim.com/ask as well, so that you're able to get your question answered in a future video. I try to design these questions focused on the questions that I think are most important, but I'd love to hear if you felt stumped or confused by questions that people have asked you in English. Okay, so this is going to be it for today. Thank you so much for joining me for English with Kim's Conversations with Kim series. This was episode 6, What's Keeping You Busy These Days? Once again, I'm Kim from englishwithkim.com. I am your guide to the essential conversation skills you need to sound more natural in English. I look forward to seeing you in another live lesson soon. Talk to you soon. Goodbye.